What's up? What's up? It's that time again for another episode of Treasures Galore. This video is going to be my book review on Robert Redford's book, The Outlaw Trail A Journey Through Time. The reason why I'm doing this is because Forrest Fenn indirectly hinted at this book in The Thrill of the Chase by saying if Robert Redford had ever written a book, it would have been better than that Gatsby thing. Well, we all know he did write a book. It's called The Outlaw Trail A Journey Through Time. And Forrest Fenn also mentions Robert Redford in Too Far to Walk, mentioning the movie Jeremiah Johnson. So there's two instances where he mentions Robert Redford and that he didn't write a book. Well, Forrest Fenn was good friends with Robert Redford, and Robert Redford made multiple stops at his guest house when he owned his art gallery. So Forrest Fenn did know that he wrote a book. So whether he is hinting that this book is important or he's trying to throw us off, I don't know. Now, I know a lot of people are skeptical about bringing outside literature into the thrill of the chase and using it for a solve, and I completely 100% respect that. I'm here just to go through this book for anyone that thinks, that outside literature can be important, because I don't think we should rule out anything, unless it's something that goes against what Forrest Fenn has said. However, there are also multiple, you know, quotes from Forrest Fenn that kind of contradict themselves. So it's kind of hard to base that off of too. But let's say you have a solve and you think it is in a graveyard. Well, Forrest Fenn said that is wrong, 100% wrong. So things like that we know we can rule out. Other things we have no idea whether we can rule them out or not. So this is why I'm doing this book review. So, a little bit about this book. National Geographic paid Robert Redford to ride the Outlaw Trail. So, he writes about his experiences and the people he meets and the places that he sees. And this all takes place mostly, around Brown's Park. Now, we all know Brown is mentioned in The Thrill of the Chase, and this is a common place for searchers to search because of the name Brown. And there's a lot of different instances, like where Warm Waters Halt could be the Flaming Gorge, flames represent warmth. So it is a very common, search area, and I believe that there are a lot of searchers that are interested in this book, and that's why I'm doing this. So I'm going to go through it. I'm not going to give it a synopsis of each page. I'm just going to go through and bring up some stuff that I thought was interesting that I'm tying back to the thrill of the chase and how I think it could be important. And I know if there are a lot of people out there that have this book, and once I get done with this, they're gonna be like, "Well, you didn't bring up this, this, and this." So this is my opinion, what I see. A person could read this book and come up with 100 different things that they think is interesting that tie to the chase that I don't see. That's kind of the beauty of this chase, right? Everyone has their different opinions, and they can read the book and come up with a completely different interpretation, especially the poem, which is, so vague where you could fit it almost anywhere. That's why I believe the thrill of the chase is important. So, without further ado, let's get into the book review. So, I have this map brought up of the thrill of the chase, and I'm pretty sure we've all seen it if we are searchers. It starts at the Canadian border, goes through down Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and the top northern part of New Mexico. So get a good look at that map, because in the forward of this book, The Outlaw Trail, there is a map. And I know this isn't the best quality picture, but here's the map. So as you can see, it's pretty much identical to the map that's in the Too Far to Walk. It has Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. Now it is it's a little wider so you can see the surrounding states. But I just think it's interesting that it has this part. Now I know this is where the story takes place, but I just see similarities between this map and the map that's in Too Far to Walk. So it has a whole bunch of different lines. It has the Outlaw Trail, train tracks. I know trains are, in a really common where warm waters halt as the train stops with the water, or the water's high and heavy loads. So thought it was interesting with the train tracks on here along with the Outlaw Trail. So let's close that out. So the map, very similar. I thought that was interesting. So also in the forward, he's talking about development and how they're going to lose a lot of the land. So I'll read a part of the forward in this book, and then I'll go back and read a part of Dancing with the Millennium. So in the forward, he writes, "The West today is in a state of change and siege. Many Westerners are worried about the invasion of their land, space, and water. They refer to the coming rape of the West and fear the inevitable loss of life steeped in tradition and custom. Others hope that the new industry and development will bring jobs and a higher standard of living. Only time will tell the full story. But we have already lost so much tangible evidence of our heritage: monuments, graves, hideouts, homesteads. Valleys that contained homes and whole pioneer towns have been flooded by dams. Landmarks have been left to wither and die in the gulches remaining after the rivers have dried up and been rerouted for irrigation or industrial use. Bulldozers have destroyed the last remains of what was not so long ago the frontier. Trails once traversed by legendary Western characters have been obliterated by concrete and asphalt. Before too long, the only vestige of the West's colorful past may be the legend and hearsay." So, a couple interesting things that he brings up. He brings up that graves are being lost. If you haven't watched my last video, go check it out about graves. He talks about rivers being dried up. Maybe that's no paddle up your creek. But what I thought was really important was that everything will be obliterated by concrete and asphalt. Now that brought me right back to The Thrill of Chase, page 135, when he says, "Someday will all of the land in New Mexico be covered with houses and asphalt." So kind of the same theme, right? Is all this going to just be, with population growth, are we going to lose all our mountains and our open spaces? So I thought that was interesting, especially with the same use of being covered in asphalt in both books. So like I said, guys, I'm just going to kind of go quickly through this. I'm going to do half the book in this video and then half the book in the next. Just bringing up stuff that I think is interesting. So if you do have your book, I'll give you the page number. That way you can go. So on page 19, he uses the word brown a lot. Now, he describes the hills as being brown, and he also mentions Brown Park numerous times. So there's a lot of different instances of the use of brown. I'm not going to go through all of them. As a matter of fact, that's the only one I'm going to bring up. But later on in that, he says they're getting ready to ride this trail, and he tells everyone that I had to tell them to bring their own bedrolls. Now, we all know in The Thrill of the Chase that he says that to put your bedroll in the back of the truck and, go looking for my treasure. So I thought that was interesting too, that the same use as bedrolls. Bring your bedroll. Forrest Fenn tells us to bring our bedroll in the back of the pickup truck and go looking for his treasure. And I believe that is in the chapter Goldenmore. So I will continue to move on. Page 24. It says, "A V-shaped opening at the top of the red wall. It looked barely wide enough to allow the passage of a horse and rider, let alone a wagon." Well, that kind of reminded me of Looking for Lewis and Clark when he's talking about going. Let me bring up the page. So he says, "We decided to follow a fast-running stream of water that seemed to have an anxious purpose of sorts. At least we could have water, and surely it would lead us to a Forest Service man trail somewhere. Gradually, the little stream got narrow and narrow, and deeper until it developed vertical sides and nothing could get through but water." So it's kind of just describing a V-shaped opening, and it's almost too narrow to get a horse through there, let alone a wagon. So it just kind of brought that little saying up in The Thrill of Chase in my mind too. So I will continue on. Let's go to page 40. So in the book, Robert Redford uses the word marveled, which is in the poem. Terry Scant with marvel gaze. So he says, "On the way back, I again marveled at Garvin's ease in negotiating the trail." Thought that was interesting. The next page, he says, "Didn't like it. Too many elbows in my ribs. I like the space here." So again, that brought me to Looking for Lewis and Clark when he says that he needed he needed some elbow room with Donnie, and he quickly got the hint. So again, talking about he needing room and elbow room. So the next one might be the one I thought was the most interesting. Now, if you haven't watched my last video, you should definitely check it out because this is going to really hit home with that last video. I wanted to bring this up in it, but I decided to leave it for this next video. So, I think this is really important, guys, but I'll let you guys make your decision. So in the book, it has this picture right here on page 69. So there's a grave marker that has a fence around it. And so this is in southwestern Wyoming, right in the border between Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. So remember that, southwestern Wyoming, there's a grave marker with a fence around it. Okay? Now, if you've read Too Far to Walk, you should know that there is a picture of Forrest Fenn standing right next to a grave marker that fell down and he righted it, and there's a fence around it. And just so happens that Forrest Fenn says that he was hiking the hills of southwestern Wyoming, pretty close to the same area where this grave marker is, with a fence around it. Isn't that interesting? So I'll continue to move on. So on the previous page, a very common theme with this book is the hatred for the BLM and the government. And again, if you haven't watched my video about Forrest Fenn and the government, you should check it out, because I feel like Forrest Fenn has hinted at through a lot of his books that he has a strong disdain for the government, and especially the BLM, for the raid that happened at his house, because that was mostly part because the BLM was involved. So again, just thought it was interesting that very common theme of hating the government, and there's this grave marker and different stuff that's brought up through the books. So on page 75, there's a slight mention of the Devil's Slide. Now there's a lot of people that believe that the Devil's Slide is hinted at in the Thrill of Chase when he goes down the fire slide out of his school and marked the tail end of his britches brown. So the Devil's Slide is, well, it's brown. So people think that that might be the home of Brown. So I just thought that I'd bring that up. So later on page, what is this? Page 97, it's the part of the book exclusively about Brown's Park. And he's talking about the history of it. And I will just read. The earliest known reference to Brown's Park was made in 1650 in the writings of Father Ortiz, a Spanish missionary. The Spanish had constructed a series of forts in this region, but the Indians set fire to most of them, driving the Spanish away. In 1825, the expedition of William H. Ashley and his fur trappers penetrated the valley in bull boats along the Green River. In 1827, Kit Carson traded here among the Ute and Shoshone Indians. The same year, a trader named Baptiste Colfax came to the valley with his Indian wife, and the valley was named in his honor under the alias Baptiste Brown. From then on, Brown's Park was the most popular trading center in the region and became the home of many trappers whose names are now synonymous with the history of fur trading in the far west. Jim Bridger. Okay, so let me just highlight some of the stuff that I thought was interesting. So the name Brown's Park came from Baptiste Brown, who actually lived in the park and had a cabin. So I know a lot of people think that his cabin was the home of Brown, because that's where the whole name came from for the park. But I thought this was really interesting. From then on, Brown's Park was the most popular trading center in the region and became the home of many fur trappers. And he mentions Jim Bridger. So again, there's Brown, and then it became the home of the fur traders. So home of Brown, maybe. But I just thought it was interesting that he brought up Jim Bridger, because Jim Bridger is mentioned in The Thrill of the Chase when he says that, right here. just outside of West Yellowstone, where Hebgen Lake is now. Russell, along with a few of Jim Bridger's trappers, was attacked by 80 Blackfeet Indians. Okay, so he mentioned Jim Bridger. This book mentioned Jim Bridger. He mentions it's the home, which is the Brown's Park, is the home of the fur trappers. So I just thought that was interesting. Later on in that page, he mentions that they would take cattle from Texas to Montana. I thought that was interesting because that's the route that Forrest Fenn took during his summers growing up. So on the next page, page 99, this is also really interesting. He says, some 170 graves are known throughout the park, but even without the standard form of civilized law and order, there was some systematic, if rough, social order. So he says there's 170 known graves in this park. So, in my opinion, I believe graves plays a huge part in this, or a cemetery does. And so there's 170 graves in this park that's named Brown, that's the home of fur trappers. So, continuing on page 99, it says, most of the grave sites, markers, and cabins, saloons, and hideouts are gone now, buried by time, development, and lack of interest. Could Forrest Fenn have found one of these grave markers that were once thought to be gone, but he did find it? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not discounting anything. So again on this page, he writes, for 50 miles there is a paved road, and then a dirt road, and a long winding descent into darkness. If you haven't seen my video about how far I think too far to walk is, I believe it's 50 miles. And I got that through the chapter, The Long Ride Home. He talks about, well, I'm not going to go into it, but check out my video if you haven't watched that. If you guys haven't caught on, I am using severe confirmation bias while reading this book and seeing what I think is important in my mind. So, again, read the book for yourselves and come up with your own opinion. I'm just giving you what I think. So, again, on page 99, he says, occasionally we passed a hunter sitting in his camper home, all warm and comfortable. So when Forrest Fenn was asked what warm means to him, he mentioned comfortable. So again, I thought that was interesting. So continuing on page 99, he says, we no longer knew whether we were heading south or north, or where. We had been told by one of the friendly hunters we passed to follow the road, go to the first left, and then go down a long canyon, a typical cowboy direction. Head out to the Juniper, turn left, go west to the Rocky Mountains. So this kind of made me think back to, once again, looking for Lewis and Clark. I think there's 3 things that I brought back to this chapter. But he's talking about mountain man wisdom. So Forrest Fenn wrote in The Thrill of the Chase, so I applied some mountain man wisdom to the situation. The sun comes up in the east and we thought out was south. And that made it easy, except south was over the highest mountain we'd ever seen. So there's cowboy direction and mountain man wisdom. But I thought it was interesting that he says, follow the road to the first left and then go down a long canyon. Well, take it in the canyon down, a typical cowboy direction. Head out to that Juniper, turn left, go west to the Rocky Mountains. So I thought that was interesting. Really reminds me of how the poem is set up. So on page 103, he writes, this is the highest canyon I've ever been in. Finally, a marker saying, welcome to Wyoming showed up. So this is the highest canyon we've seen. He mentions in looking for Lewis Clark is the highest mountain we've seen. And there's a marker saying, welcome to Wyoming. I'll continue on. Page 106. So he writes, Robert Redford writes, the talk turned to a long fight the family has been waging against the Bureau of Land Management hold on to the ranch. The BLM came in on their ranch, put in the Fish and Game Reserve, tried to push us off, and make their own rules. We spent the better part of 12 years in the courts trying to stop them. So again, just fighting with the BLM reminds me of Forrest Fenn. I'll continue on, page 111. Butch would ride around a large tree, both hands on his rifle, placing bullet holes an inch apart all the way around the tree. The tree still stands, though it's nearly dead. all the bullet holes are still quite visible. So I thought that was interesting. He's talking about Butch Cassidy rode around and shot this tree, and you could actually still see this tree with bullet holes in it. So I thought that was interesting because I made my video about what I thought the blaze was, and I went with the most simplest approach because that's what Forrest Fenn has hinted at the most, is that it's a marking in the tree. And so people said that it won't last the test of time. Well, we really don't know how long Forrest Fenn intended these clues to last, because when he was asked, he said they'll probably be around in 100 years. So he didn't say with certainty that any of the clues might be around in 100 years, which is rightfully so, because there's natural disasters and stuff like that. But to me, he said that the chase gets harder and harder the longer, it's not found. And maybe that's because the blaze might not be there for very long. I don't know. Again, guys, this is all speculation. I know nothing. So I just thought that was interesting. And the last part that I'm going to bring up is page 18. So he writes, "She gave us a crab apple from her tree and took us up on the hill behind the house to show us some graves, most of them unidentified. The few graves that were marked were done crudely." Okay? So, in my opinion, the key word is home. And so I thought it was interesting that she took them behind the house to show them some graves. Well, as you all know, if you watch my videos, I believe that you're running away from home, the home in Brown, through a cemetery, across a wide open field, and you have to cross a barbed wire fence. So I just thought it was interesting that the graves are right behind the house or the home. And then also, the most important part was the few graves that were marked were done crudely. So, in my word for me, guess what? I tripped over something and fell flat on my face. That never happens to me. Then I started to push myself up. I came nose to nose with the rude aluminum grave marker. How strange and out of place. I could barely read the nameplate, and it was a French shoulder. Then suddenly we saw more grave markers. Then we looked down, we found more. Where does it say? In this, he uses the word crudely, just like he does in this book, The Outlaw Trail, A Journey Through Time. So, sorry, I lost my place, but I'll read. But I had tripped over a crudely made stone grave marker that had fallen face down in the grass. So, a crudely stone grave marker, and then there's this also one that the one that was identified was done crudely. So, both the words crudely used together with a grave marker. So, I thought that was really interesting too. The next one, he says that we rode out through some cottonwoods that hug Eastern's cabin. So I thought cottonwoods was interesting. There's a few times where I thought cottonwood might be the tree that has the blaze on it, if you are brave and in the wood. So there is a loss. This is my last point that I'm going to make, guys. There are a lot of instances about him using pinion and pinion nuts in this book. Forrest Fenn made a comment years ago saying at the site of the treasure you could smell wonderful smells of pinion or pine needles or something like that. So pinion only grows in New Mexico, Colorado, and I think part of bottom Wyoming. So if you would smell pinion at the treasure site, that would pretty much eliminate a lot of Wyoming and a lot of Montana. Now, he retracted that statement, saying he wished he wouldn't have said that. But now, does that mean he wished he wouldn't have said that because it's true and he just eliminated 2 states? Or did he say that because it's not true? So he couldn't really say, because if he said it's not true, then that means maybe there's no pinions around. I don't know. So I just thought that was interesting. There's a lot of mentions of pinion in there. I know a lot of people who believe the treasure chest is in New Mexico, Colorado, believe that. And that's completely alright. So that's it. I'm going to break this video into 2. I just thought it was really interesting, especially with the graves. I know, guys, I'm using my confirmation bias on this whole thing. But it is my YouTube channel, so that's all I can go off of is my opinion and what I see. So hope you guys like it. Tell me what you guys think. I thought it was really interesting with the grave marker, the fenced-in grave marker, and the fenced-in grave marker and Too Far to Walk, pretty much in the same place, southwestern Wyoming. So, and then all the 170 grave markers, and then all the other instances that I brought back to the Thrill of the Chase. Now, I might have stretched some of them. I understand that. Just trying to make it interesting. So, tell me what you guys think. After I get done with this book, I am going to send it to a searcher. I don't need the book anymore, so it'd be nice to give someone whose solve is in Browns Park, or someone who really wants the book because they think there's an interesting hint in here, or this is the missing piece to their solve. I think that'd be awesome. So if you do want this book, write me an email and tell me why you should get this book and why it would be important to you, and then I'll pick a winner and send it out. So it would be awesome too if you could keep it going, if you read the book and then send it to another searcher who wanted it, but that is completely up to you. I won't make rules after the fact. So, anyways, guys, I hope you guys liked it. Book review number 2, book review number 3 will be out here in a little bit. I'm going to make another video that's mostly The Thrill of the Chase and Too Far to Walk. That will be my next video, and then I'm going to come back and do the book review in a couple videos. So, hope you guys like it.